You've seen how long this video is, so let's make it to the point. 4th Doctor, 7 years, Sharda is included, and at the bottom of the list we have number 42, The Invasion of Time. Wait, hang on, Invasion of Time not bad, I hear you say. Invasion of Time good, it has that cliffhanger at the end of part 4 revealing the Sontarans, right? You are correct, aforementioned cliffhanger is great, but 1 minute out of a 150-minute story is not enough to save this utter mess. I am baffled that fans criticise the Deadly Assassin for their portrayal of the Time Lords when they are absolutely incompetently inept here. How are the Lords of Time conquered by crappy tinfoil aliens? And why is there a myth that it was Patrick Troughton's Doctor who had tinfoil monsters when fans clearly forgot about the Vardens? But what do you expect when this story is so lame and boring and so padded? Even the Sontarans don't impress because they speak as if they have laryngitis, and I haven't even got to Leela's pathetic exit. Let's have the toughest companion of them all fall in love with a guy she just met. Oh, how compelling. I don't even know what else to say about this story. For being the most padded, frustrating, and another word for frustration that I can't be bothered to look up, The Invasion of Time ranks as the worst 4th Doctor story for good reason. Number 41. Underworld. Quite possibly the most excruciatingly boring Doctor Who story ever made. I struggle to get through this on rewatches, which is a shame because the idea of doing the legend Jason and the Argonauts in space isn't a bad one. The biggest problem this serial has is that nothing happens.
Boring.
We're given the premise at the end of episode 1 and then it's meandering about in caves until the ending. It's full of vapid characters running around caves with nothing of substance or even entertainment happening. There is virtually nothing to this story to discuss, and it amazes me this was written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, who have so much imagination with their script, but it's clear they were running out of steam on some serials. It may sound worse than Invasion of Time, but I place this a tad higher because at least it's not 6 episodes long. For being the most boring story ever made, Underworld will drain the life out of you in front of a blue screen. Number 40. The Creature from the Pit. If the 2 previous stories on this list are the most boring, this just feels like the most desperate. The whole production plays out like a pantomime with ice queens and bandits, but none of it just gets a laugh out of me. The titular creature lacks any menace at all and looks like a cheap dress-up toy you'd get at Christmas. Despite the cool costumes and sets, Creature from the Pit feels tired, lethargic and just not very engaging, which I find a huge shame as David Fisher's efforts for the previous season were great, and his last 2 were so mediocre. Furthermore, if you want a better version of this type of story, watch Ambassadors of Death. It's a far better watch at even double the length. Seriously, think about it. It's the same story. You can all thank me later. Number 39. The Power of Kroll. You may be surprised to see a Robert Holmes story this slow, given that during this Doctor's era he was in his prime, but after 10 years as a writer and 3 years as head writer, it's understandable he put out something as bland as this. Despite some really lush film work, The Power of Kroll doesn't really leave much to admire, as the Swampies versus human conflict isn't engaging in the slightest. They're both out for blood with no one to root for on either side, so why should I care if any of these people survive? Kroll may look impressive, but the split screen effect is just atrocious. The cast look bored and the serious and drab tone make this one a chore to sit through. For being the worst of the Key to Time season, The Power of Kroll gets sacrificed to a giant squid that's also the key to time. Number 38. Meglos. A shape-shifting cactus stealing a dodecahedron that will give him absolute power? Looks like I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue. Whilst I like Tom Baker as Meglos, the rest of the production reeks of desperation and cheapness. When we are focusing on the Tygellen politics, the show abandons all ambition and realism, and it's one dreary artifice scene after another. When it comes to the universe of planets in Doctor Who, Tygella is not one of their finest hours, and there's just so little effort that's got into establishing it visually and creatively. It's a story that's bogged down with sci-fi cliches, a planet on the verge of extinction, doppelgangers, a megalomaniac wanting to take over the universe, sentient plants, and just fails to do anything original with them. Add to that a general poorness in production values, which really highlights the unnatural nature of the production, a waste of Lala Ward's talents as Romana, and a final episode that lacks any interest or ingenuity, and you have a disappointing affair for this supposedly fresh new season. If it wasn't for Tom Baker's best efforts as Meglos, this would have been written off completely, but for having a few redeeming qualities, this serial gets crushed by a giant slab for nicking my dodecahedron. Number 37, The Leisure Hive. I'm glad Season 18 gets better from the last two serials on this list, but that doesn't excuse the dullness of this affair. Now, from a visual set and makeup perspective, this story succeeds with flying colours and holds up very well. The biggest shame about this story is the tone it takes. Rather than being cheeky satire on the decline of British tourism, the serial is surprisingly taking everything really seriously, and seems more concerned in uninteresting sci-fi jargon that only seems to appeal to geeks and nerds who will find this remotely engaging. While I've maintained in the past that this story feels like a holdover from the Graham Williams era, I think that's a bit of a stretch to say, as at least the previous era stories were fun, and this really isn't. For taking itself so seriously, The Leisure Hive is going to be put in an aging machine whilst looking pretty. Number 36, The Android Invasion. Yep, it exists. Number 35, Revenge of the Cybermen. Not as bad as its reputation suggests, as there is great set and location work in Wookiee Hole, and the regulars look like they're having fun making this. Revenge of the Cybermen is still heavily flawed, and whilst the Cybermen and Vogons look great and the atmosphere in episode 1 is nicely established, a lot of the problems here lie on a script level. The plot has way too many holes in it to make this come together as a whole, and the new weakness to gold that the Cybermen have is just silly. But what I think the story has over the others lower than it is that I can at least enjoy it and find it entertaining. It's an average piece of 70s entertainment in an otherwise brilliant season, and for being the only Cyberman story of the 1970s, it's easily the best to feature them this decade. Number 34, The Invisible Enemy. Yes, there are some very ropey effects here and there, but there are also some really great ones as well. Yes, there is an issue of a giant prawn wanting to take over the universe, but there's also the brilliant concept of hunting through the Doctor's mind. And yes, it can be a pretty plodding story for the most part, but the script is brimming with imagination, great ideas, and some nice dialogue. I'm not trying to suggest that The Invisible Enemy is a forgotten classic, but there's a quick-fire pace to events that means it is constantly offering up something new. There is a troubled production which I happen to find quite watchable. It's a colourful story that winds up being a great deal of fun that doesn't deserve to be wiped out by a virus. Perfectly okay. Number 33, The Armageddon Factor. A perfect representation of the Graham Williams era, moments of comedy, darkness and imagination interspersed with moments of pantomime, and it's a shame that the budget isn't there to bring to life the ambitions of the script, but here we are. The first 4 episodes are as good as anything in season 16, but the story really stutters around episode 5, and thankfully recovers for a pretty decent conclusion. It's a well-plotted story as we have 3 two-parters spread across 6 episodes that keeps things fresh and interesting, and the script keeps bringing up nice ideas to the surface and dramatically explores a quite unusual war. While it may feel empty with its characterization, the Armageddon Factor I find to be a pretty enjoyable romp that I enjoyed as a kid and find to be underrated on rewatch. Number 32, Nightmare of Eden. Okay, I didn't mean to put 3 of Bob Baker's scripts together like this, but here we are. Wildly imaginative and intelligent, but also quite cheap-looking and farcical, The Nightmare of Eden will conflict its audience depending on what you're looking for from Doctor Who. It's one of those rare stories that tackles something as serious as drug smuggling, and pulls it off quite well. Whilst the Mandrills are way too cuddly and cute to convey any sort of threat, Tom Baker and Lala Ward are at the top of their game, especially Tom, who, aside from some moments of pantomime in his performance, he's giving a considerably serious performance that drives home the drama of the message of drug smuggling, and any story that can juggle spongy predators, computerized zoos, miniature landscapes you could step into, ships crashing, inebriated authority figures, slapstick bureaucrats, certainly gets my vote of confidence. For being a comically fun story about drug smuggling, Nightmare of Eden gets its captains laughing at it whilst they're being massacred. Number 31, The Horns of Naimon. I know it's popular to hate this story, but I can't help admit I have a soft spot for this serial. It's a very clever piece of writing disguised as a comic pantomime, and it offers much to those who want to laugh at Doctor Who and those who want to take it seriously. As such, Horns of Naimon should be praised for its engaging use of ideas and dense plot construction, rather than criticised for its lack of resources. On the occasion, the story does tip over into farce, but it's a huge dollop of fun with some unexpected statements on some very tired ideas. The Naimon as a race are very well realised from a script and costume, and Tom Baker and Lala will provide both laughs and take the material seriously enough for the adventure to work for me. For being Theseus and the Minotaur in space, and being a comic myth with a sci-fi twist, the Horns of Naimon will bring you tribute while splitting your trousers. Number 30. Destiny of the Daleks. Beneath all the shortcomings of the production, there is a sound sci-fi story at work here, and clearly Douglas Adams has had a huge impact on Terry Nation's original script. Whether you see this as a detriment or a positive addition will all be down to you. Destiny of the Daleks has a bottom-of-the-barrel reputation, but as usual, the truth is that it is nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. At the same time, it isn't the Dalek spectacular that should have opened the season, and could have done with double the budget thrown at it, and the script given one more chance over to iron out any conflict in tone that keep cropping up. I don't even mind the Daleks no longer having mutants inside them, and have become robotic due to their heavy reliance on logically trying to beat the Movellans. David Goodison is trying his hardest as Davros, but lacks compared to his successors and predecessors, and I think that's the biggest problem with Destiny of the Daleks. It's perfectly good on its own, but if you compare it to other Dalek stories it does fall flat, but entertaining nonetheless. Number 29. Image of the Fendal. As the last stab of gothic horror before its fantasy era, Image of the Fendal does have a lot going for it. Stylistically, this story is in a league of its own with some atmospheric location work and terrific set design. Science, superstition and mythological terror mix to great effect, and there are even some wonderful monsters thrown in for good measure. I don't think you could make a school scary, but the creative team certainly pulled it off. The pacing is slow to let the atmosphere build up, but I feel it can be a weakness as well, as there's times when this story can just grind to a halt, making this a meandering watch. This isn't a story I watch often, as I find myself being drawn to other gothic horror serials of the time, but for being a good scare with great ideas, Image of the Fendal is a decent scare, but there's better horror stories out there. Number 28. The Sontaran Experiment. Unique at the time for being 2 episodes long and shot entirely on location, The Sontaran Experiment is a pleasant breather after the stifling claustrophobia of the Ark in space, and the scenery is so spectacular it manages to get away with the brilliant premise of being set on a post-apocalyptic Earth, the planet having survived a battering by solar flares. Because of its briefness, the story is more effective as a coda for the story that came before it, rather than a gripping narrative in its own right, and also as a further glimpse of the Sontarans and emphasising their terrible war with the Rutans. Much of the material committed by Sontaran Steyer is quite sadistic, and already the new administration team is making its mark. As a story with its own identity, it is pretty disposable, but it is still enjoyable enough that adds extra depth to the corner of the galaxy set up in the Ark in space. My main criticism is that I do wish it was shot on film rather than video, as the presentation can look quite cheap, but all in all, it's a short but sweet bit of filler. Number 27. Robot. As a debut story for the 4th Doctor, this is a hugely fun and colourful adventure that feels like the previous era rather than the new style and tone that was to come. Departing Robot, you might be under the impression that things were going to stay pretty much the same, which certainly doesn't make this a bad story, but rather unique. Terrence Dick's dialogue is fast and brilliantly witty, and the story is full of memorable characters and moments. At 4 episodes it does feel remarkably fast-paced. Tom Baker hits the ground sprinting with a performance that reaches into the stratosphere, pulling every trick out of the book to make sure that the audience isn't wrong-footed throughout. There's a nicely detailed relationship between Sarah and the robot that really works thanks to the efforts of Elizabeth Sladen and Michael Kilgareth. It turns out to be a rather touching one. Robot is one of those Doctor Who stories where it's best not to think about any of the details for too long, because it all starts to fall apart, but simply go along with the ride and be seduced by the adventurous tone, the charismatic performances and wonderful atmosphere. As a final hurrah to an incredible era of Doctor Who, it is a thoroughly entertaining and energetic piece that I never tire of enjoying, even if the budget isn't always there. Number 26. The Face of Evil. The idea of the Doctor's actions from a previous unseen era having dire consequences is a great idea that should be explored more often, and this story gets very close but may not entirely stick the landing. It is a story that takes the psychological and religious angle over straightforward action-adventure, but still manages to tell a fairly entertaining story. The Face of Evil deals with a heavily religious theme and has the balls to be less than positive about it. It's almost a deconstruction of the god myth. Xoanon is simply a diseased computer with delusions of grandeur, but the myth behind this god is an extremely powerful and destructive force. It shows how propaganda can lead to a belief system on its own. It's a great debut for Leela too, as like the Doctor, she is an outcast amongst her own people, and offers a type of companion we've not had before or debatably since. Where this falls down is its second half. The revelations all get bogged down with uninteresting technobabble that is just tedious and dull to sit through. And feels like a step backwards instead of pushing the boundaries like the first two episodes. For having a strong first half and a meandering second, The Face of Evil is just shy of the top 25 Fourth Doctor stories. Number 25. Full Circle. This serial finally kickstarts just how good Season 18 can be, and fully shows off script editor Chris Bidmead's style for Doctor Who very positively. The script is remarkable indeed, intelligent and exploring some pretty weighty scientific and biological themes, but there is an emotional core to the story too. Romana's dilemma of returning to Gallifrey, the Doctor's fury over the Marsh child's death, Adric losing his brother, and all these elements is what's needed to make the weighty subject matter stick the landing. It's also the lushest and most attractive looking Doctor Who story in a while, with some beautiful location work, detailed sets, and imaginative directional touches. A very well structured story with some great surprises and an optimistic ending that shows promise for the East Space trilogy, though maybe not for Adric's character. For being written by an 18-year-old fan, Full Circle certainly impresses on a script level that's stylishly brought to life. Number 24. The Pirate Planet. Written by the Douglas Adams, this serial is an inspiring piece of writing that justifies Graham Williams' approach to Doctor Who. While The Pirate Planet may be criticised for its weak production values and tepid direction, that is doing a disservice to the sheer entertainment factor this story has on offer. Douglas Adams is a perfect fit for Doctor Who, where his creativity can be left off the leash, and the result is one of the smartest, funniest, and best structured scripts in the show's entire run. The twists are genuinely momentous, and the final episode is packed full of wonderful scenes and subversions. Tom Baker is on fire, and his confrontation with the pirate captain is one of the Fourth Doctor's best ever moments. With a robot parrot, a plank, and a pirate captain that plunders other people's goods, even manages to be a good pirate story. It was completely insane for them to even attempt making something as ambitious as the Pirate Planet on a Doctor Who budget, but as it flourishes on this kind of giddy imagination, doesn't hold back, and as a result there are many moments in this story where Doctor Who approaches absolute genius, and it's just a boatload of fun. Number 23. The Keeper of Traken. Stylized as a Victorian period drama, but in space, The Keeper of Traken will either put you to sleep or entertain you. For me, it's most certainly the latter. The costume and set design are practically top-notch for what is essentially a studio-bound serial, topped off with wonderful supporting cast, and you have the look and feel of a cosy Sunday night drama. It is a planet with customs, politics, backstabbing, harmony, style, a class system, military, myths, culture it has in every respect has been thought through. Even if this story didn't have the last-minute revelation that the Master wasn't behind it all, The Keeper of Traken would still hold up on its own. For being a lush costume drama, this serial sets the stage very well for the Fourth Doctor's final adventure. Number 22. Planet of Evil. Typically in classic Doctor Who, trips to the past are very well realised, and outer space stories wind up looking pretty cheap, but Zeta Minor is brought to life with such conviction and style, it confounds me that every foray into outer space can't be this amazing. Director David Maloney is perfectly suited to stories like this. He captures the unseen horrors with real skill, and lets the story slowly crawl under your skin, giving Louis Marks' script creepy ideas as a chance to bed in your mind and fester. Planet of Evil is a quintessential Philip Hinchcliffe story. It's a horror riff, superbly made, very scary, and occasionally unsettling for all its perfection. Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen are a superb team and so watchable together, and they're unencumbered by either Unit or Harry. The Fourth Doctor and Sarah finally get the chance to show that they are made for each other. This is an often forgotten story, but there is so much here that works. People write it off as an empty chiller, but both visually and conceptually, it's so much more impressive than that. While it may be overshadowed by the other classics in Season 13, Planet of Evil is a great story to watch on dark autumn nights with the lights switched off. Number 21. The Reboss Operation. Alongside Carnival of Monsters, this is another overlooked gem from Robert Holmes. I mean, come on, this serial has a planet-selling con man. What is not to love here? The Reboss operation kicks off the Key to Time season with style, wit, and class. The plot of Reboss is quite unusual for a Doctor Who story. A heist tale on an alien world where a pair of conmen are trying to sell an entire planet to an intergalactic tyrant, but trying out new things is exactly why this show has managed to survive for so long. Teaming with Double Axe brought to life with a superb cast, adding a fully fleshed world, a rich cast of characters, and more fantastic lines that you can shake a stick at, and the result is an immensely enjoyable Doctor Who story, which happens to be unique in tone and structure. As discussed prior, there is an intimate and epic scale to this story, and in both respects, it really impresses. Visually, the Reboss operation is a marvel for the eyes, with some gorgeous sets and costumes, and if it was sold on its atmosphere alone, it would still be a winner. While it may not thrill, as it's not much of an action serial and focuses more on dialogue and character, but because of its delights lie in its scripting and performance, this story is hardly dated at all, and remains as delightful now as I'm sure it was when it was first transmitted. Number 20. The Hand of Fear. As Sarah Jane's final story, it was pretty gutsy of the cast and crew for her to be possessed for an episode, but Elizabeth Sladen proved so chilling in the role, it reminds us of how much we love Sarah. The location work combined with the fear of a nuclear holocaust make this a gripping serial to watch, and Eldrad is a surprisingly sympathetic villain that you really feel sorry for. Now, if I was reviewing the first 3 episodes, I would rate this a lot higher, but given that it falls apart in the final episode, it does get marked down. Whilst the final episode isn't all bad, it's clear the money has run out, as Castria isn't one of Doctor Who's most well-realised planets, and the regenerated Eldrad loses all sympathy and becomes a generic shouty villain that must be stopped. But what saves episode 4 from being a total disaster is Sarah Jane's goodbye. No kiss or physical touch doesn't need to convey how much the Doctor and Sarah love each other, and it's beautifully portrayed by our 2 leads. For being consistent for its first 3 episodes, disappointing for its last act, but having a gut-punching emotional final scene, The Hand of Fear just about makes it into the top 20. Number 19. The Mask of Mandragora. Quite possibly the most underrated and best script from writer Louis Marks, The Mask of Mandragora shows the exquisite visual splendour that producer Philip Hinchcliffe brought to the show. His idea of "can we do this" approach reaches its apotheosis in a story that sparkles with the stylish splendour of Renaissance Italy. The sets look very expensive and lush, the location convinces that they really did pop over to Italy for a shoot, and the costumes and props never once let the side down. Dudley Simpson provides one of his most classy and impressive musical scores too to accompany this sumptuous production. Up until Big Finish, I feel this is the closest we ever came to mimicking the pure historicals from the William Hartnell era, with a strong emphasis on period detail and lavish production and costumes, rather than the time period just being a backdrop that happens to have a monster in it as well. Even the threat is far more intellectual than usual. The danger of bypassing the Renaissance and falling back into the old times of superstition, proving an enticing hazard if the Mandragora helix succeeds. Add to all of these strengths a gorgeous affirmation of the dazzling Doctor and Sarah partnership, strong performances across the board, and you have an extremely striking period drama that can hold its head high amongst the outstanding trips back into history for the show. Some people may find the story boring, but I would disagree with that consensus strongly. While it didn't entertain me much as a kid, it certainly has grown in appreciation for me over time. Number 18. Warrior's Gate. There are so many moments to treasure throughout this that it is impossible to recount them all, and everything from set design, lighting, effects, music, performances, direction and scripting are all at their peak here. Visually, it feels like Hinchcliffe is back in the producer's seat, but the imagination feels like something out of the Graham Williams era. Warrior's Gate feels like the best of both their takes on Doctor Who, and it remains one of John Nathan Turner's greatest achievements as producer. It's full of clever ideas, witty moments, dramatic twist, and great characters. It is hard to fault a story that takes such an unusual approach to telling a story and get it so right. The way it visually tells its story is nothing short of commendable, and one of the highlights of the 1980s in my opinion, and proof it was needed that 80s Who could be just as bold, innovative and imaginative as anything that came before and since. Number 17. State of Decay. This serial I feel is the epitome of Season 18's style, as I believe each serial will have something for everyone's taste and preference for Doctor Who. There is the gothic horror and scare elements favoured by Philip Hinchcliffe, the witty undergraduate humour highlighted by Graham Williams, and also the scientific approach as loved by the J&T Bidmead collaboration. Terrance Dicks is not a script writer who lets you down, as he packs in some interesting mythology about the Time Lords, great moments between the Doctor and Romana, and a wealth of quotable lines here. There's a great Paddy Kingsland score which highlights the atmosphere of terror, and the sensuality between the three who rule suggests the eroticism of vampire tales, without ever dipping too hard into the adult drama. This is still a family show after all. For being such a terrific vampire story, State of Decay is a marvellous and overlooked story from the 4th Doctor era. Number 16. Logopolis. The entirety of Season 18's undertones has been the element of entropy, decay, and prolonging life, and death catches up to the 4th Doctor in a very fitting swan song here. Whilst the technobabble may drag the story down, the universe-ending consequences of the Master's actions is felt very well, with brilliant scenes of decay throughout. Logopolis is a very well realised world packed to the brim with great world building, and there's always something going on to keep the momentum going and making all the relatively uninteresting sci-fi jargon flow nicely without feeling dull or tedious. For ending the 4th Doctor's life in such grace and style, Logopolis rightly deserves its place as one of the stronger regeneration stories. Number 15. The Stones of Blood. For being the 100th story to be transmitted, The Stones of Blood pretty much sums up Doctor Who perfectly. 2 parts gothic horror, 1 part glowing domestic drama, and 1 part sci-fi bonkers. Lots of quality performances and even the odd duff effect. Writer David Fisher bursts onto the scene with potentially one of the wittiest scripts in Doctor Who, crammed full of sparkling, quotable dialogue that the actors just love performing. It's ridiculously entertaining throughout with some notable direction and effortless changes of tone. While the courtroom drama may not be as engaging as the horror aspect, this is only a slight nitpick as to what is a thoroughly entertaining serial, and it isn't even my favourite story from Season 16. Speaking of which, number 14. The Androids of Tara. Watching this story is like enjoying a cool glass of lemonade on a warm summer's day. I always finish it with a big smile on my face. If you're willing to go on a fairy tale adventure into outer space, then this is just about the zenith of what producer Graham Williams tried to achieve with Doctor Who. It's unique in and of itself and deliberately small scale, highlighting atmosphere, plot twists and memorable characters. It uses Romana better than any of the other story to feature Mary Tam, and features the Doctor at the top of his game. He's a swashbuckler, he's a kingmaker, and he's the master of witty repartee. There is no other Doctor Who story like this one, and that's its ultimate strength. It encapsulates the show during a creative peak, trying out outrageous new ideas to see if they could fit into the show's scope. I wouldn't really try and pin a genre on this story. Is it sci-fi, romance, action, fairy tale, fantasy? It's pretty much all of them, and more, and with more than a twist of the Prisoner of Zenda, it's a bit of literary as well. It dares to revel in its magic, and I really love the Androids of Tara for that. Number 13. Shada. Only in a Douglas Adams script could you stop for a pot of tea in a gentleman's study, which also happens to be a TARDIS, before heading off to defeat the villain for the week. While it may have taken 38 years for this story to be completed, it was certainly worth the wait. The location in and around Cambridge looks great, and grounds the story like very few in the Graham Williams era, allowing Douglas Adams to inject a great deal of domestic allure into his imaginative tale. In Tom Baker, Lalla Ward, Dennis Carey, Daniel Hill and Victoria Burgoyne, you have an honest-to-goodness ensemble championing this tale, each character appealing in their own right, and all the different pairings proving a success. The story is a clever one with its clues expertly slipped in early so Adams can build on them as the narrative progresses, bringing all the elements together just before the 5th episode, and we have a wonderful climax. To summarise, Shada is a lovely piece of work to cap off the Williams era, and contains so much of what made these 3 years a delight, despite this era's reputation amongst fans. It may have taken a while to be completed, but Shada is certainly the classic that its reputation has built up to be. Number 12. The Sunmakers. Any comedy that was written by Robert Holmes was going to make you laugh and hurt you as it does so, and The Sunmakers has a real sting to it. The serial features suicide, an excruciating method of murder, a sadistic toad of a villain who enjoys exploiting and hurting his victims, a government that drugs its population into complying with slavery and exploitation, a heroine who threatens to skin people alive, and guest heroes who live in the squalors by choice and enjoy throwing their weight around, threatening to violently abuse people and slit the Time Lord's throat or burn his face with a poker. The exploited population are violent, rude and obnoxious, and you have to question whether they're worth saving. But there is so much to love about this story, and what always impresses me the most is the superb work that is done by the actors. It's an incredible guest cast, and they acquit themselves beautifully, providing countless memorable, dramatic and funny scenes. It's a story that favours the quirks of performance and writing over effects, and it holds up very well for those reasons. The Graham Williams era may have taken a knock at the time, but it's certainly been reappraised since as pushing the series in new directions, and for being a wonderfully dark and political satire, The Sunmaker stands as one of the era's best efforts. Number 11. Horror of Fang Rock. The fact this was written at the last minute and the script turned out to be this good makes me question whether Terrance Dicks was even a human being. With a tiny setting, a handful of very memorable characters, and a very real menace, he has perfected the base Under Siege formula. It's a subgenre that Doctor Who has been playing out for over a decade now, and you'd think there's nothing new to learn from it, but when you shift settings and characters on what appears to be the same type of story on paper, it becomes very different in reality. The tension refuses to let up right until the last few seconds. Early episodes concentrate on the hidden evil, and once the cat's out of the bag it becomes a creepy killer among a story before ending in a monster fest. The dialogue sparkles, especially for the guest characters, and with very few words we know what these people are all about. There's class tension, mysticism, progress debates, survival tactics. The dialogue is crisp and to the point, but it has a great deal to say about the times too. It's well worth paying attention to the dialogue. So, although I find the story a bit uncomfortable to watch, as it is only a testament to the talent of everybody involved, Horror of Fang Rock works on so many levels. It's a skillfully told character drama, a bite-your-nails good horror flick, an entertaining Doctor Who story, and just a brilliant start to Season 15. Number 10. Terror of the Zygons. Combining the previous era's Earthbound format with the gothic horror style of the current era, and you have one hot classic here. There is a manifest of things to enjoy, terrific dialogue, warm interaction between the characters, a stunningly atmospheric music score, ample evocative location work, shock moments, effective model work and a great cast of regulars. If you were looking for the quintessentially excellent Doctor Who story, you probably found it here. The Zygons, despite only appearing once in the classic series, have a fantastic screen presence and a wonderful design, and it's no wonder they had such an impact on viewers that asked them to return. Terror of the Zygons may have a simple plot, but the style and execution makes this a wonderful classic for me. Number 9. The Seeds of Doom. One of my strongest memories is watching this Christmas Day 2010 and instantly falling in love with it, and all these years later, yep, I still love this serial. It's as close to a perfect Doctor Who adventure as you will ever find, with a sparkling script, plenty of action and excitement, scary moments, gorgeous performances and avant-garde direction that lifts the whole piece somewhere above the very high standards that's already set by Season 13. You'll never find a more perfect representation of both a Doctor and companion either. Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen are both at the top of their game, and they dazzle their way through all 6 episodes without a single misstep. Add to that a wealth of glorious location work, a wonderful adversary in Harrison Chase, and several era-defining moments, and you have something for everybody here. It doesn't surprise me that this story is held in such high esteem. It deserves all the praise heaped upon it and more. I adore every second of this serial, and it would be number 1, but there's 8 other stories on this list that I love more. Number 8. The Ark in Space. One of the prime examples of all the elements of a production coming together, the writer, actors, designer, and musician are all working overtime to ensure that the Ark in Space is an epic, yet claustrophobic sci-fi chiller that really gets under your skin. The Ark itself is a magnificent setting brought to life with rare vision by Roger Murray Leach, and proving the perfect pristine environment for this graphic tale of possession to take place and really make an impact. Tom Baker is a revelation in his second story, but saying that the material is so strong and instantly attuned to his more dangerous portrayal, it would have taken a poor actor to even fail to make this work. Elizabeth Sladen and Ian Marter provide fantastic support, and it's immediately obvious that this is going to be a great team to watch. The Wirren are a nasty Doctor Who enemy, a breed of insects that require human incubators to plant their eggs in, to gestate and tear free, the knowledge of their breeder stolen. We get to witness this process at every stage, and the appalled reactions of the cast do a lot of the work for us. But Holmes once again shows how it should be done. The arc in space is packed full of great ideas, it's gorgeously plotted and structured, gains momentum throughout, it's full of drama and great lines, and has a solution that is sufficiently set up and satisfying. It is a great piece of writing, a triumph of imagination, of performance and of design. This is a story that proves that it is necessary to push yourself to the limit, because sometimes you may be surprised at what you can pull off. For being Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat's favourite story, The Ark in Space rightly deserves its place as a beautiful classic. Number 7. The Robots of Death. A masterpiece of suspense and horror, The Robots of Death is one of those classic Doctor Who stories that doesn't put a foot out of place. As a drama, it is expertly constructed, and the world in which the Doctor and Leela drop in on is packed full of detail to make it one of the most convincing future environments. The design and effects are perfectly in tune, and on his way out the door, Philip Hinchcliffe overspends the budget outrageously and makes this a visually stunning piece. It sees the Doctor and Leela at their finest, and continually fires great lines and memorably frightens right until the end, and is easily one of the best classics. Sorry if I am sounding repetitive here, but that's how brilliant these top 10 stories really are. Number 6. City of Death. The crowning achievement of the Graham Williams era, it encompasses much, has so many layers that is bred into the fabric of human existence itself, and yet still manages to tell a hugely enjoyable adventure story in the process. The Jaggeroff spaceship exploding that caused the birth of the human race and scattered Scaroff through time, where he pushed the human race forwards to a point where they could help him go back in time and stop it all happening, is so bogglingly audacious that it feels like Doctor Who is throwing the highest concepts into the air and shrugging as though it does this all the time. It takes brilliant ideas like the Doctor popping in for a chat with Leonardo da Vinci, the man drawing a picture of a time lady with the crack through the face to explain the time slip, 7 Mona Lisas hanging out in a basement, a ruthlessly inept detective who punches out everyone the Doctor talks to, but ultimately throws the punch that saves history, a suave and elegant bad guy who is involved with a multi-million-dollar heist to wipe out humanity, and best of all, the Doctor dodging traffic trying to hail a taxi screaming, "Is no one interested in history?" City of Death is the work of incredibly skilled writers with formidable imagination and a real sense of humour. Ambitious, funny, atmospheric, perfectly performed, directed and scored Doctor Who. Do I even need to say more? Number 5. The Brain of Morbius. There are no lengths that the Brain of Morbius won't go to repulse you and entertain. This is nasty, playful, imaginative, and very frightening in parts. The Brain of Morbius is the ultimate expression of the Holmes Hinchcliffe Gothic horror approach. The story plunders Shelley and other sources with confidence, and applies it to a gripping, beautifully thought-through science fiction setting. While stagey as written Khan is, it's a terrifying world full of ancient secrets, and abhorrent experiments for the Doctor and Sarah to unearth. The performances of Tom Baker, Elizabeth Sladen, Philip Maddock and the rest are all astonishingly good, managing to tap into the melodrama and deliver authentic performances, and director Christopher Barry is bringing this story to life with so much atmosphere. He's clearly been influenced by Hammer horror, and he plumps for an atmosphere of foreboding in the first 2 episodes, before letting rip with some graphic horror in the second. Dudley Simpson's music and Barry Newbury's design are faultless, and complement each other brilliantly to soften the air of terror, and the other constructing some moody sets to enhance the atmosphere. I have never failed to enjoy this story despite watching it over and over again. It is very funny and very scary, and sees the Doctor and Sarah's relationship at its height. For being a flawless retelling of Frankenstein, The Brain of Morbius rightly deserves its place in the top 5. Number 4. Pyramids of Mars. If I was to introduce a story to a newcomer, this would certainly be one of them. Taking heavy inspiration from the Hammer horror monster films released by Universal Pictures earlier in the century, especially 1932's The Mummy, Pyramids of Mars is a masterfully atmospheric piece of Gothic horror, and what makes the story so great is its execution. The stakes really feel so incredibly high. When the Doctor talks about Sutek's godlike power, you totally believe him. Confined to a chair for almost all of the runtime, so much of Sutek's power is instead communicated through his dialogue, delivered in the deep, proper and wonderfully threatening tone of Gabriel Woolf. Tom Baker's performance too is quite possibly his best. He plays the Doctor in a much less light-hearted way than usual. Instead he's somber, every line communicating the fear he feels, the possibility that this time he might not be able to save everyone. Pyramids of Mars is essential viewing for any Doctor Who fan, and if you haven't watched it already, pause the video and go watch it right now. I certainly won't mind. Number 3. Genesis of the Daleks. Yeah, it's alright. Okay, who am I kidding? Genesis of the Daleks lives up to its iconic status, and even more. The direction is bold, violent and shocking. You wouldn't want Doctor Who to be this way every week, but because it is just too disturbing in places, it's a fatalistic one-off, it's a complete tour de force. The lighting is superb, Dudley Simpson's music has really come on since Tom Baker took over the role. It highlights the drama without being too melodramatic. It's a huge cast, and all of the characters are impeccably performed, from sadistic to uncomfortable, and Liz Sladen and Ian Marter providing impeccable support to Tom Baker's Doctor, who has finally come into his own here. The standout, of course, has to go to Michael Wisher for creating such a memorable character in Davros. It's still completely riveting throughout because Davros' malevolent behaviour is absolutely delicious to watch. There's no part of Genesis of the Daleks that isn't firing on all cylinders, and it's the first major success of many for incoming producer Philip Hinchcliffe. Even the conclusion is satisfying, managing to be both an anticlimax but loaded with irony and murderous relish. It's a story I've watched over and over, and it is a hard-hitting, depressing watch, but I am reminded with Genesis of the Daleks just how good Doctor Who can be when everything comes together with absolute precision. For being the first Tom Baker story I ever watched, Genesis of the Daleks is still nothing short of astounding. Number 2. The Deadly Assassin. Politics, world-building, wit and fright combine to make The Deadly Assassin not just another Doctor Who story, but feel like a genuine event. It has one of the best first episodes in Doctor Who history, a mini-drama in its own leading right up to a foreshadowed but unforgettable cliffhanger. Episode 2 plays out very much like CSI Gallifrey, with the Doctor working an investigation that will ultimately save his life and bring down his arch-enemy, the Master. It is great fun and excellently scripted, but after the breathtaking opening, the third episode is just famous for its arrangement of phobias that would leave any adult a wreck, let alone kids who are watching. It's stylishly directed on film, featuring one unforgettable set piece after another, and standing out as something that has never been done before or since. This is another standout episode that just exists on its own. It's a uniquely horrific experience. Robert Holmes' subversive script and David Maloney's slick direction combine to make this another jewel in the Philip Hinchcliffe era. They really make making classic Doctor Who look so easy, and it would be my favourite fourth Doctor story, but that honour goes to... Number 1. The Talons of Weng Chiang. Rarely have we been treated to such a luxurious story, one that takes the time to flesh out all of its characters, tell an atmospheric and gripping tale, and one that frequently dazzles with its colourful dialogue, and is wrapped up in a budget-bursting production that manages to make the smallest of scenes totally believable. Add to this mix, you have the Doctor at the height of his powers, accompanied by a companion who completely complements and enriches the story, a splendid score from Dudley Simpson, and a fascinating and expensive look at the Victorian era, which may have been overused at this point, but told in 6 beautiful episodes that ensure nothing is rushed or underdeveloped, Doctor Who climaxed its season 14 with the best story of its entire run. Flawlessly written, wonderfully acted, and featuring some of the best direction of all time, The Talons of Weng Chiang is superb storytelling from start to finish, and is my favourite fourth Doctor story. Whew, well, we got through 7 years worth of Doctor Who history. I'll keep the outro brief. Join me next time where we'll be diving into the 1980s and discussing the 5th Doctor. See you then.